You're moving to Canada? You? The guy who can barely afford bus fare now thinks he'll be a high-flying finance guy in Toronto? That's rich. The words, dripping with a cold, sticky kind of amusement, came from Mr. Julian Thorne, the senior director who was also the biggest snob at the whole international company. Everyone in the fancy, glass-walled conference room had stopped talking. 12 pairs of eyes were on me, Ahmed, the junior analyst they all treated like a glorified coffee boy. I had just announced I was leaving the branch in Dubai because I had gotten my permanent residency visa and a job offer in Canada. Julian didn't just laugh, he threw his head back and let out a huge, roaring laugh that sounded like a donkey braying into a microphone. What are you going to do, Ahmed? Shovel snow? This isn't some cheap vacation spot. It's an economy powerhouse. You'll crash and burn. You're too slow for the North American market. He even nudged his expensive Italian shoe against my worn-out suitcase sitting by the door. That was the last straw. The feeling of being so small, so invisible, was crushing, but a tiny, sharp spark of pure, hot resolve ignited in my chest. I looked him dead in the eye, and before I could even speak, he cut me off again, this time with a venomous smirk. Tell you what, he leaned in, his voice dropping just enough to make his words feel like a secret, cruel promise, when you fail, and you will fail, don't call me looking for a reference. You'll be nothing but a statistic. I felt my face heat up, not with shame, but with a sudden, overwhelming urge to prove this corporate bully wrong. But before I could snap back a promise of my own, the phone on the meeting table rang, a loud, jarring noise. Julian snatched it up, annoyance plastered on his face. As he barked into the receiver, I grabbed my suitcase, my heart pounding like a drum, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just left that room, carrying Julian's cruel laughter and a burning promise to myself straight onto the airplane. I had to succeed, not just for me, but to wipe that arrogant smirk off his face forever. I was moving to Canada, the land of opportunity, and the only thing I knew for sure was that the next time my path crossed Julian Thorne's, the laughter would stop. But what I didn't know was just how soon, and how strangely, that crossing would happen. Build up, the story leading up to the main event. Let's rewind a bit. I grew up in a place where having an education felt like holding a lottery ticket. I studied accounting and finance like a maniac, often under a flickering street lamp because we couldn't always pay the electricity bill. My first real job was at this huge multinational corporation, the same one Julian Thorne worked at. From day one, the office was a minefield of corporate snobbery. I noticed quickly that the people who looked like me were given the worst desks, the hardest tasks, and the smallest praise. Julian was the king of this low-key racism and subtle bullying. He'd never say an outright slur, but he'd always forget my name, call me the T-boy, or schedule meetings right over my lunch break so I'd have to work while everyone else ate. One day, I presented a simple, yet brilliant, idea to save the company a ton of money on their supply chain logistics. Julian listened, nodded, and then completely ignored me in the meeting. 3 weeks later, he presented my exact idea, word for word, and got a huge bonus and praise from the CEO. That feeling of being stolen from, of having my hard work erased by a rich, arrogant snob, was sickening. But I kept my head down. I was saving every penny because I had a goal, Canada. It was the place my grandfather always talked about, a place where people were judged on their work, not their background. I applied for the express entry program, studied for the language tests, and filled out mountains of paperwork. After 3 long years, I got the letter, permanent residency approved. And with it, a job offer as a junior analyst at a respected financial technology, fintech, firm in Vancouver, a beautiful city with mountains and the ocean. My last day at the old company was supposed to be a quiet farewell. I only announced my move because the HR department insisted. That's when Julian pounced, turning my moment of triumph into his cruel, laughing spectacle. Pacing, highs and lows. The flight to Vancouver was a blur of fear and excitement. Landing in the rain, everything looked so big, so clean, and so cold. The job I had secured, the junior analyst role, was good, but the salary was small. I worked harder than ever before. My Canadian boss, Ms. Chen, was tough but fair. She didn't care where I was from, only that my quantitative analysis was perfect. My first breakthrough came 6 months in. Ms. Chen gave me a tough project, analyzing a massive amount of data to spot a pattern of fraud in an investment portfolio. Everyone else had failed. I stayed late for weeks, poring over complex algorithms. One rainy Sunday, I found it, a tiny, almost invisible anomaly in the stock market data. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate fraud ring. Ms. Chen was ecstatic. The firm was famous overnight. I got a huge bonus and a small raise. Things were finally looking up. But with the money came new problems. The cost of living in Vancouver was insane. My tiny, shared apartment was far from the downtown core, and the long commute was exhausting. I was still feeling the loneliness of being in a new country. I'd call home, and my parents would ask if Julian Thorne was right. Was I struggling too much? The fear of failing was a constant shadow, a low-level anxiety that never truly left. I knew I needed to level up. I needed to move to a place with more opportunity, a place with bigger risks and bigger rewards. I set my sights on Toronto, the real financial hub of Canada. I secretly started applying for jobs. A huge investment banking firm in Toronto, a major player in the global capital market, offered me a job. The title was senior analyst, a huge jump. The salary was almost double what I made in Vancouver. This was my underdog comeback moment. I was finally leaving the struggle behind. I packed my bags again. Cliffhanger cycle. Landing in Toronto felt different. I was no longer the scared newcomer. I was a professional. My new office was in one of those amazing glass towers, just like the one I dreamed of. My first week in the new job, I was getting settled into my massive new desk when my boss, Mr. Hamilton, walked over. "Ahmed," he said, handing me a thick file, "welcome to the big league. This is your first major file. We're about to acquire a huge, but struggling, North American manufacturing company. It's a confidential deal. I need you to do the deep dive on their assets and financials. It's a total mess, but the deal is too big to ignore." I took the file, feeling the weight of the responsibility. I opened it and started reading the company's name, Thorne Global Manufacturing. My blood ran cold. Thorne. It was a common name, I told myself. It had to be a coincidence. But as I flipped the page and saw the name of the company's CEO, my breath hitched. The picture next to the name was the unmistakable, arrogant face of the man who had laughed at me, the man who had stolen my work, the corporate snob who promised I would fail. It was Julian Thorne. He had left my old company months ago and was now running his own company, one that was clearly failing and that my firm was about to buy out. And I was the analyst with the power to approve or crush the deal. My heart hammered against my ribs. Poetic justice was knocking, but could I be professional? Could I keep my cool? I had a few days to decide Julian's entire future, and he didn't even know I was the one holding the hammer. What a twist. If you want to see how Ahmed uses this power and how Julian Thorne finally gets his poetic justice, please subscribe to Stories Mike, turn on those notifications, and tell me in the comments what Canadian city you think Ahmed should invest in next. I stared at the name on the file, Julian Thorne, CEO. My mind raced. The arrogant man who had laughed at me, called me a T-boy, and told me I was too slow for the North American market was now depending on my analysis, my due diligence, to save his failing company. This wasn't just fate, it was the universe handing me a microphone and saying, "Speak your truth." I decided I wouldn't let emotion cloud my judgment. My firm was paying me to be professional, and I would be. But I would also be thorough. I spent the next 3 days living inside the file, poring over every page of Thorne Global Manufacturing's financial records. I analyzed their debt-to-equity ratio, their cash flow, and their entire business strategy. Pacing, highs and lows. Low, building tension. The picture was grim. The company was bleeding money. Julian had expanded too fast, using reckless, short-term loans. He was trying to sell the company before it fully collapsed, likely to secure a huge golden parachute for himself, leaving his hundreds of employees and smaller Canadian suppliers in the lurch. My analysis showed that the company was worth far less than Julian was asking. If my firm bought it at his price, it would be a huge financial disaster for us. I felt a pang of conflicting emotions. This wasn't just about Julian, it was about protecting my new firm and doing the right thing for my career. The twist then, late one night, deep within the auditing reports, I found something shocking. Julian hadn't just been a corporate snob, he was a corporate fraudster. Hidden under layers of complex, legal-sounding jargon were signs of insider trading and what looked like a deliberate attempt to inflate the company's value to trick buyers like us. He was trying to sell a garbage company for gold, and he was using illegal methods to do it. The evidence was irrefutable. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just a chance for poetic justice, it was a chance to expose a major financial crime. I immediately locked the report and called Mr. Hamilton, my boss, who was surprisingly still awake. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have serious concerns. The numbers don't add up. I need to brief you first thing in the morning. This goes beyond a simple acquisition. The showdown." The next morning, Mr. Hamilton called an emergency board meeting. Julian Thorne was already there, looking slick in his expensive suit, unaware that his fate was about to be decided by the junior analyst he'd once mocked. Julian started the meeting with his usual arrogant charm, giving a shiny, fake presentation about his company's massive growth potential. He kept glancing at me with a look of bored contempt, not recognizing me in my sharp Toronto suit and confident posture. Then, Mr. Hamilton pointed to me. "Ahmed, you've done the deep dive. What's your final due diligence report?" I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with simple, icy clarity, using the language of finance, the language Julian had claimed I was too slow to understand. My analysis shows that Thorne Global Manufacturing is not an asset, it is a liability. Based on the true balance sheet and profit and loss statements, the company is currently valued at less than 10% of the asking price. Julian's smile vanished. "Nonsense. Who is this junior analyst? You can't trust the numbers from some immigrant who probably got his degree out of a cereal box." The word immigrant hung in the air, a final, ugly shot of racism from the bully. The room was silent. Julian had just proven who he was. I didn't flinch. I let his insult pass, focusing on the facts. "Mr. Thorne," I said, pulling up my final slide, "the numbers are not mine. They are yours. And they show something far worse than mismanagement. My report indicates a clear pattern of securities fraud and market manipulation." I projected the key document onto the screen, the proof of his illegal activities. Julian's face went completely white. He finally recognized me. The look of cold shock in his eyes was priceless. It's the T-boy," he stammered, his voice losing all its arrogance. How did you get here?" "I got here," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "by working twice as hard as you, Mr. Thorne. I got here because Canada is a place where you are judged by your work, not by your pedigree or the color of your skin. You laughed when I moved here and said I would crash and burn. You said I'd be nothing but a statistic." I leaned in toward the microphone on the table, my voice carrying the weight of years of bullying and prejudice. "Well, Mr. Thorne, you're absolutely right. I am a statistic," I finished with a powerful finality. I'm the statistic of the underdog comeback. And you? You're the statistic that proves poetic justice is real. My recommendation to the board is not only to reject this highly deceptive acquisition but also to immediately forward this evidence to the Canadian regulatory body. The boardroom erupted. Security was called. As Julian Thorne was escorted out, defeated and disgraced, he shot me one last desperate, hateful look. I just gave him a slow, professional nod. My boss, Mr. Hamilton, shook my hand firmly. Ahmed, he said, you just saved this firm hundreds of millions. You are exactly the kind of talent this country needs. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ms. Chen, my old Vancouver boss, who had clearly heard the news through the industry grapevine. It simply read, "Proud of you, senior analyst." I walked to my window and looked out over the amazing Toronto skyline. It was cold, yes, but inside, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt since that day in the conference room years ago. The laughter had stopped. And I was standing tall in the Canadian financial hub, a long, long way from being the junior analyst Julian Thorne once mocked. That is a powerful conclusion to Ahmed's story. He achieved his underdog comeback and delivered poetic justice to the corporate bully. If you enjoyed this story of prejudice, showdown and corporate snobbery, make sure you subscribe to Stories Mike right now. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of someone else's amazing journey, and drop your city in the comments. I love reading where my audience is from. Would you like me to draft a summary and a strong title/thumbnail combination for this completed video?